The cabin sat like a broken tooth against the Montana skyline, its rotted boards barely holding together in the wind. Sarah Matthews adjusted her hiking pack, feeling her 8-month belly strain against the straps as she rounded the corner of the derelict structure. She'd come here for peace, for the silence that helped quiet the nightmares from her past life. But silence was the last thing she found. The man was bound with military-grade zip ties, blood crusted around his mouth, eyes wide with terror. When he saw her, he didn't beg for help. Instead, he whispered 3 words that turned her blood to ice. "They found you." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her concealed weapon. Old habits from her days as an undercover FBI agent never truly died. She'd faked her death, changed her name, started over. Built a life where her unborn daughter would never know the violence that had defined Sarah's existence. Now, her past had tracked her to this godforsaken mountain, and whoever had left this man here knew exactly who she really was. But who was hunting her, and how much time did she have before they came for her child? The man's breathing was shallow, labored. Sarah scanned the tree line surrounding the cabin, her trained eyes searching for movement, for the glint of a scope, for anything that might signal immediate danger. The wind whistled through the pines, but nothing else stirred. "Who are you?" she asked, keeping her voice low as she approached cautiously. Her free hand rested protectively over her swollen belly. "Agent Torres," he gasped, then corrected himself. "Former Agent Torres. Like you." The name hit her like a physical blow. Miguel Torres. She'd heard whispers about him during her final days at the Bureau. A good agent who'd gone off the grid after a case went sideways. That was 3 years ago, around the same time she'd orchestrated her own disappearance. "How did you find me?" "I didn't. They did." His eyes darted nervously toward the cabin. "Left me here as bait. Said they wanted to see if the great Sarah Chen would risk exposure to save a fellow agent." Her birth name. No one had spoken it aloud in 2 years. Sarah's pulse quickened, and the baby kicked hard against her ribs as if sensing her distress. "Who's they, Torres?" Before he could answer, a twig snapped somewhere behind the cabin. Sarah's weapon was in her hand before the sound fully registered, muscle memory overriding months of peaceful civilian living. She positioned herself between Torres and the sound, crouching as much as her pregnancy would allow. "1 shooter," Torres whispered urgently. "Maybe 2. They've been watching for hours, waiting." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Her cabin was 6 miles downhill through dense forest. Her truck was parked at the trailhead another 2 miles beyond that. 8 months pregnant, she couldn't outrun anyone, and Torres was in no condition to travel fast even if she freed him, which left fighting. The thought should have terrified her. For 2 years she'd worked to bury that part of herself, the woman who could kill without hesitation, who thrived in chaos and violence. She'd built a new identity as Sarah Matthews, a quiet bookkeeper who read pregnancy magazines and debated baby names with her fictitious dead husband. But as another sound echoed from the woods, closer this time, she felt the familiar cold calculation settle over her like armor. "How many rounds do you think they have?" she asked Torres. "Standard loadout." "But Sarah, you're..." "Pregnant. I know." She shifted position, using the cabin's corner for cover, while maintaining a view of the most likely approach routes. "Doesn't mean I forgot how to shoot." A figure moved between the trees 50 yards out. Male, average build, carrying what looked like a military-issue rifle. He was being too careful, too methodical, professional, but not elite level. Sarah made her decision. She fired twice in rapid succession, both shots aimed not at the figure, but at the trees flanking his position. Bark exploded, and the man dove for cover, revealing a second shooter positioned further to the left. "That's your rescue attempt?" Torres hissed. "That's my negotiation," Sarah replied, never taking her eyes off the woods. "I know you can hear me," she called out. "You want to talk, drop your weapons and step into the clearing. You want to keep playing games, I've got all day and enough ammunition to make this very unpleasant for everyone." The forest fell silent except for the wind. Sarah counted heartbeats, timing the contractions that had started during the confrontation. False labor, probably triggered by stress. She hoped. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, a voice carried across the distance. "Agent Chen, we just want to talk, then talk loud. I can hear you fine from here. It's about the Kozlov case, about what you saw in Prague." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. Viktor Kozlov had been dead for 2 years, killed in the same operation that had supposedly claimed her life. Whatever these people wanted, it was connected to the case that had destroyed everything she'd once been. The case she'd hoped was buried forever. The stranger's eyes rolled back, and his body went limp against the ropes. Sarah pressed 2 fingers to his neck, feeling for a pulse, weak but steady. Blood seeped from a gash above his left temple, and his breathing was shallow. Professional instincts kicked in, overriding the maternal panic that had seized her moments before. She needed to get him untied and assess his injuries, but every survival instinct screamed at her to run. Those 3 words, "They found you," echoed in her mind like a death knell. After 2 years of carefully constructed anonymity, of Sarah Chen becoming Sarah Morrison, of trading crime scenes for hiking trails, someone had tracked her down. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her distress. She placed a protective hand over her belly and forced herself to think clearly. First, secure the area. She scanned the forest around them, listening for any sound that didn't belong, footsteps, voices, the metallic click of weapons being readied. Only wind through pine needles and the distant cry of a hawk. Working quickly, she untied the ropes binding the man's wrists and ankles. The knots were professional grade, tied by someone who knew what they were doing. Her fingers traced the marks on his wrists, rope burns that suggested he'd been bound for hours, maybe longer. When she lifted his eyelids, his pupils were uneven. Concussion, definitely. She'd seen enough crime scenes to recognize torture when she encountered it. Someone had worked this man over before dumping him here. The question was whether they'd left him as bait or assumed he was already dead. The man stirred, mumbling something incoherent. Sarah leaned closer, trying to make out his words, when her phone buzzed with a text message. Her blood turned to ice as she read the screen. "Unknown number. Hiking alone isn't safe for expectant mothers." Her hand instinctively moved to the Glock concealed beneath her oversized hiking jacket. Old habits. She'd told herself she carried it for wildlife protection, but that was a lie. Sarah Chen might have disappeared, but she'd never stopped looking over her shoulder. A second text arrived, "Walk away, and we'll let you keep playing house." They were watching her. Right now, Sarah's training kicked in as she surveyed the ridgeline above, looking for the glint of binoculars or a rifle scope. The late afternoon sun would make it harder to spot surveillance positions, but she caught a brief flash of movement near a cluster of boulders about 300 yards uphill. The bound man groaned and tried to sit up. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "My name is Marcus Webb. I worked with your partner Jake before—" He coughed, specks of blood hitting the pine needles. "Before Phoenix." Phoenix. Sarah's carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. Phoenix was the operation that had ended her FBI career, the case that had forced her into witness protection, the reason Sarah Chen had to die so Sarah Morrison could live. 3 agents dead, including her partner Jake Reeves, a criminal organization with roots so deep in law enforcement that she couldn't trust anyone in a badge. "How do you know that name?" she demanded, pulling the Glock and pointing it at his chest. Marcus raised his hands weakly. "Jake left something for you. Evidence. Insurance policy. They've been hunting for it ever since Phoenix went sideways." He reached slowly into his jacket and produced a small digital recorder, its surface cracked but LED light still blinking. "They got to Jake before he could give it to you, but he made sure I'd find you if something happened." Sarah's phone buzzed again. "You have 10 seconds to start walking." The baby pressed against her bladder, a reminder of everything she stood to lose. 2 years of building a life with David, of believing she could leave the darkness behind. Now that darkness had found her and it wanted to drag her back. "What's on the recorder?" she asked Marcus. Names, dates, financial records, enough to bring down the entire network. His eyes focused on hers with desperate intensity. Jake died protecting this. They killed him for it. Movement in her peripheral vision. Two figures in tactical gear emerging from the tree line 50 yards to her right, weapons drawn but not yet aimed. They moved with military precision, flanking positions, trying to box her in. Sarah's mind raced through options. She was 8 months pregnant, alone, outgunned. But she was also a former federal agent with specialized training, and these woods had been her sanctuary for 2 years. She knew every trail, every hiding spot, every advantage the terrain could offer. The recorder in Marcus's hand represented everything she'd tried to leave behind. Justice for Jake. Vengeance against the people who destroyed her old life. The chance to stop running. But taking it would mean abandoning the safety she'd built, the future she'd planned with David and their unborn child. "Sarah," Marcus whispered urgently, "they won't stop. Even if you walk away, they'll never let you live in peace. Not now that they've found you." The tactical team was closing in. The cabin felt smaller when Sarah returned, as if the walls had crept inward while she was gone. She locked the door behind her, something she hadn't done in months, and pulled the curtains shut. The familiar space that had been her sanctuary now seemed exposed, vulnerable. She moved through her evening routine mechanically, lighting the wood stove, preparing a simple dinner of soup and bread, checking the baby's movement with gentle pressure against her belly. Everything normal, everything the same. Except for the blood still caked under her fingernails and the stranger's words echoing in her mind. "When they found you." Sarah had spent 2 years convincing herself that they was a phantom, a paranoia left over from her FBI days. She'd changed her name, paid cash for everything, chosen this remote corner of Montana precisely because it was the kind of place where people minded their own business. She'd built a life so quiet, so unremarkable, that it should have been invisible. Should have been. She pulled out her laptop, an old, untraceable machine she kept for emergencies, and hesitated before opening it. Once she started digging, there would be no going back to the illusion of safety. But the stranger's terrified face haunted her. Someone had tortured him for information, and that information had led them here. The first search yielded nothing unusual. No recent disappearances in the area, no alerts from local law enforcement. She expanded her parameters, checking neighboring counties, then states. Still nothing that matched her mystery man. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, and Sarah rubbed the spot absently. "I know, little one. This isn't what we planned." She'd envisioned spending these final weeks nesting, preparing, maybe reading pregnancy books instead of scanning criminal databases. On impulse, she searched her old name, the one from before. Agent Sarah Chen had been declared dead in a car bombing 18 months ago, a convenient fiction that had allowed her to disappear completely. The official story still held. No new articles, no questions raised about her supposed death, but someone had connected the dots anyway. She closed the laptop and walked to the bedroom, where her go-bag waited in the back of the closet. She hadn't touched it in over a year, but muscle memory guided her hands to the hidden compartment. Cash, fake IDs, untraceable phone, ammunition for the Glock that lived in a separate hiding place. Everything she'd need to disappear again. Except this time, she wouldn't be running alone. Sarah sat heavily on the bed, one hand on her swollen belly. At 8 months pregnant, she was hardly built for life on the run. The baby could come any day now, and newborns needed stability, safety, medical care, everything that vanished the moment you went underground. The rational choice was clear: pack tonight, leave before dawn, establish a new identity somewhere far away before the baby arrived. She had enough resources to make it work, enough experience to stay hidden. But rationality warred with exhaustion. She was tired of running, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of living like a ghost. For 2 years, she'd been Sarah Mitchell, woodworker and hermit. She'd learned to sleep without checking the locks 3 times. She'd stopped automatically cataloging exit routes wherever she went. She'd been healing, Now that careful progress felt as fragile as spun glass. Her phone buzzed. The regular one, not the burner. A text from Doc Matthews, the only person in town she'd grown close to. "How are you feeling? Any contractions yet?" She stared at the message. Doc had been so excited about delivering her baby, his first in almost a decade since most women drove to the hospital in Kalispell. He'd already prepared his medical bag, cleared his schedule for the next 2 weeks just in case. If she ran now, he'd never know what happened to her. None of them would. Sarah typed back, "Feeling fine. Baby's active tonight." The response came quickly. "That's normal for this stage. Call me if anything changes, day or night." Such simple kindness. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone worry about her well-being without ulterior motives. In her FBI life, concern always came with strings attached: agency politics, case priorities, career advancement. Doc just wanted her and the baby to be healthy. She deleted the conversation and turned off the phone. Outside, wind rattled the windows, carrying the scent of snow. Winter was coming early this year, which would make the mountain roads treacherous but also create natural barriers against pursuit. If she was going to run, she needed to do it soon. But first, she needed to know exactly what she was running from. Sarah returned to the laptop and began typing, diving deeper into databases she'd hoped never to access again. Somewhere out there, people were hunting her. She intended to find them before they found her. The baby kicked again, as if sensing her mother's rising tension. "Don't worry," Sarah whispered. "Mama knows how to fight." The stranger's breathing had become shallow and ragged by the time Sarah reached her truck. She'd half-carried, half-dragged him down the mountain trail, her pregnant belly making every step a calculated risk. Now, as she helped him into the passenger seat, his head lolled against the headrest, revealing the full extent of his injuries. 3 fingers on his left hand were bent at impossible angles. Burn marks dotted his forearms in precise patterns. Cigarettes, she realized, with a familiar cold dread. Professional work, the kind that left lasting impressions, both physical and psychological. "Stay with me," she murmured, starting the engine. The nearest hospital was 40 minutes away, but there was something closer, something she'd hoped never to use again. She drove past the turnoff that led to town, instead taking a dirt road that wound deeper into the mountains. The stranger stirred as they bounced over potholes, his eyes finding hers in the rearview mirror. "Where?" he croaked. "Somewhere safe." The lie came easily. Nowhere was safe now, not for either of them. The cabin appeared after 10 minutes of driving through dense pine forest. It looked abandoned, rotted porch steps, broken shutters, weeds growing through the foundation. Exactly as she'd designed it to appear. Sarah parked behind the structure, hidden from the road, and killed the engine. Inside, beneath layers of dust and neglect, was a fully equipped medical station. She'd prepared this place 3 years ago, during those paranoid months after she'd first tried to disappear. Back when she still believed they might find her. She cleaned the stranger's wounds methodically, her hands remembering skills she'd learned at Quantico and refined in the field. The baby kicked restlessly as she worked, as if sensing her elevated heart rate. She whispered apologies to her unborn daughter, for the stress, for the violence creeping back into their world, for what might come next. "You're FBI," the stranger said. It wasn't a question. Sarah's hands stilled. "Former. Sarah Chen. You worked domestic terrorism, then counterintelligence." His voice was stronger now, though still rough from whatever they'd done to his throat. "You disappeared after the Kozlov operation went sideways." Every muscle in her body tensed. The Kozlov operation. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 3 years. It was the case that had ended her career, ended her marriage, ended everything she thought she knew about loyalty and justice. "Who are you?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would change everything. "Marcus Webb. I was DEA, embedded with Kozlov's organization for 18 months. He struggled to sit up straighter. I know what really happened in Prague." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Prague, the safe house explosion. 2 agents dead, Marcus Webb listed among them. She'd read the after-action report, seen the forensic photos. No one could have survived that blast. That's impossible. You died in... I was supposed to die. Marcus's eyes met hers, and she saw the truth there. The same hunted look she recognized from her own mirror. They needed me gone because I'd learned too much. Just like they needed you to disappear. The baby kicked hard, and Sarah winced, one hand moving protectively to her belly. Who's they? Same people who've been hunting you for 3 years, same people who tortured me for the location of this place. His gaze shifted to her stomach. They know about the baby, Sarah. They know everything. The words hit her like physical blows. Her carefully constructed life, the small mountain town, the new identity, the promise of a normal life for her daughter. It was all crumbling. She thought of David, probably just finishing his shift at the hardware store, planning what to cook for dinner. Sweet, innocent David, who believed her name was really Susan and that her scars came from a car accident. "How did you find me?" she asked. "I didn't. They did. I escaped before they could finish the interrogation, but not before they got enough." Marcus struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. "There's something else. The Kozlov network. It wasn't destroyed in Prague. It evolved, went deeper underground, and now they're making their move." Sarah felt the walls closing in. She'd always known this day might come, had prepared for it in the abstract way someone prepares for a natural disaster, hoping it never happens while taking reasonable precautions. But holding her pregnant belly, thinking of David's trusting smile, the reality felt crushing. What do they want? You eliminated key players in their operation, cost them millions, damaged relationships with their partners. They want revenge, but more than that. Marcus paused, his expression darkening. They want your expertise, your knowledge of federal investigative techniques, your contacts, your skills. They're planning something big, and they need someone with your background to make it work. Outside, a branch snapped in the forest. Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward the weapon she no longer carried, then froze. In that moment of reaching for a gun that wasn't there, she realized how far she'd let her guard down, how utterly unprepared she was for war. Sarah's hands trembled as she helped Marcus to his feet, his weight heavier than expected against her shoulder. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them. Every instinct screamed at her to move faster, but her pregnant body betrayed her with each labored step down the rocky trail. "Who sent you?" she whispered, supporting Marcus as they navigated around a fallen log. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage on his shoulder, and his breathing came in short, pained bursts. "Does it matter now?" Marcus grimaced, stumbling slightly. "They know where you are. That's all that counts." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, old enemies surfacing like ghosts from a life she'd tried to bury. The Kozlov case had ended 3 years ago with bodies scattered across 2 states and a criminal empire in ruins. She'd testified in closed sessions, watched from behind bulletproof glass as the survivors were sentenced, then disappeared into witness protection with promises of safety. Those promises felt hollow now. A branch snapped somewhere behind them, and Sarah froze. Marcus tensed beside her, his good hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. The forest held its breath, even the birds falling silent. Sarah counted her heartbeats, 1, 2, 3, before the normal sounds of the wilderness resumed. "How many?" she asked, adjusting her grip on Marcus's arm. "At least 4 that I saw. Professional, well-funded." His voice was getting weaker. "They've been watching your house for days, learning your routines." The pregnancy threw them off. They weren't expecting that. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air, her quiet cabin, her morning walks, her careful life of anonymity, all of it compromised. She thought of David, probably still asleep in their bed, oblivious to the danger closing around them. Her phone had no signal this deep in the mountains, and they were still miles from the main road. They reached a small clearing where an old logging road intersected with the hiking trail. Sarah paused, scanning their options. The road would be faster but more exposed. The trail offered cover but would take twice as long, with Marcus injured and her condition slowing them down. Left, Marcus said, reading her hesitation. He nodded toward the trail that curved deeper into the forest. They'll expect us to take the road. That's where they'll set up. Sarah didn't question his tactical assessment. Despite his current state, Marcus moved with a controlled awareness of someone who'd survived situations like this before. She wondered who he really was, this bloodied stranger who'd known exactly where to find her. As they pushed deeper into the woods, Marcus began to talk in broken sentences, his voice fading in and out with exhaustion. Contract. Came down last week. Price tag high enough to bring out the serious players. Someone very much wants you dead, Sarah. I need names, she said, helping him over a stream that cut across their path. The water ran clear and cold, and she could hear it rushing toward the valley below. Kozlov's nephew, Victor. He survived the trials, went underground. Word is, he's been building something new, waiting for his chance. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Victor Kozlov had been 18 when his family's empire collapsed, just a kid on the periphery of the investigation. She'd barely paid attention to him during the trials, focusing instead on the lieutenants and enforcers who'd carried out the murders. A mistake that might cost her everything. He blames me for destroying his family, she said, more to herself than to Marcus. Blames you for everything. The deaths, the arrests, the money they lost. Marcus leaned heavily against a tree, breathing hard. He's had 3 years to plan this, Sarah. 3 years to build resources and recruit talent. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Sarah winced. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the solid weight of the life she carried. 8 months of peace, of believing she could leave the violence behind and build something pure and safe. 8 months of pretending the past wouldn't find her. Marcus was studying her with sharp eyes despite his obvious pain. You're thinking like a victim, he said quietly. That's not who you are. Sarah met his gaze, and for a moment the pregnant woman disappeared, replaced by the federal agent who'd spent 6 years hunting the worst humanity had to offer. The agent who'd never lost a case, never backed down from a fight, never let the monsters win. No, she said, her voice hardening. It's not. Above them, a helicopter's distant rotors chopped through the mountain air, the sound growing steadily louder. Sarah looked up through the canopy, catching glimpses of metal and glass between the leaves. The hunters were closing in. Sarah's hands trembled as she disconnected the call, the weight of Marcus's words settling over her like a suffocating blanket. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, its walls pressing inward as the reality of her situation crystallized. 8 years of carefully constructed peace, shattered by 3 whispered words from a dying stranger. She moved to the window overlooking the valley, her trained eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. Nothing appeared out of place, but that meant little. Professional hunters knew how to remain invisible until the moment they struck. The baby shifted restlessly inside her, as if sensing her elevated stress. Sarah placed both hands on her swollen belly, fighting the urge to flee immediately. Running while 8 months pregnant would be suicide, but staying might be worse. Her mind raced through possibilities. The Kozlov case had been airtight, or so she'd believed. Victor Kozlov himself was serving 3 consecutive life sentences in ADX Florence, the most secure prison in America. His organization had crumbled after her testimony, key lieutenants either dead or imprisoned. But criminal empires had long memories and patient appetites for revenge. Sarah moved through the cabin with purposeful efficiency, muscle memory taking over as she began to prepare. From beneath loose floorboards in the bedroom, she retrieved items she'd hoped never to touch again: a Glock 19, 2 spare magazines, a knife with a 4-inch blade, and a small device that would scramble electronic surveillance within a 50-foot radius. The weight of the gun felt foreign yet familiar in her hands. She checked the action, confirmed the magazine was full, and tucked it into the waistband at the small of her back. The knife went into her boot. Her phone buzzed. A text from David, flight delayed. Won't be home until tomorrow night. Miss you. Sarah stared at the message, her throat tightening. Should she warn him? Tell him to stay away? But any deviation from normal patterns might alert whoever was watching. Professional surveillance teams monitored communication changes as carefully as physical movements. She typed back, "Miss you too. Safe travels." Another lie to add to the foundation of deception their marriage was built on. David believed he'd married Sarah Chen, a freelance graphic designer who'd moved to Montana for the quiet life. He had no idea about Sarah Martinez, the FBI agent who'd spent 5 years infiltrating the most dangerous criminal organizations on the West Coast. A sound from outside made her freeze, the distant snap of a branch under weight. Sarah killed the lights and moved to the back window, peering through a gap in the curtains. The forest was a patchwork of shadows and moonlight, every dark space a potential hiding spot. There, movement between the pines, roughly 200 yards out. A figure in dark clothing, moving with the careful deliberation of someone conducting surveillance. Sarah's blood chilled as she spotted a second figure further to the left, then a third to the right. They weren't here to watch. They were here to eliminate. Sarah's training kicked into overdrive. 3 visible operatives meant at least one more she couldn't see, likely positioned to cut off escape routes. The cabin's isolated location, once a source of comfort, now became a tactical nightmare. No neighbors to call for help, no witnesses, and the nearest law enforcement 40 minutes away, if they could even reach her in time. She grabbed her emergency bag from the closet, a go-kit she'd maintained out of paranoid habit. Cash, fake identification, prepaid phones, and medical supplies. Everything needed for a quick disappearance, though she'd never imagined using it while pregnant. The baby kicked sharply, and Sarah winced. How could she run? How could she fight? Every tactical advantage she'd once possessed was compromised by her condition. A new sound reached her ears, the soft scrape of boots on the front porch. Time was up. Sarah moved through the cabin like a ghost, using routes she'd memorized during her first week here. The back door was her only option, but it would mean exposing herself to the operatives in the woods. Still, movement was better than being trapped. She eased the door open, listening for any sound that might indicate immediate danger. The night air was crisp against her face, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance an owl called out, or was it a signal? Sarah slipped outside, keeping low as she moved toward the tree line. Every step was agony, her body protesting the sudden demands being placed on it. The baby seemed to sense the danger, remaining unusually still. Behind her, she heard the subtle sound of the front door being breached. They were inside now, discovering an empty cabin but warm coffee and fresh signs of occupancy. She had perhaps 60 seconds before they realized their quarry had fled. Sarah reached the trees and melted into the shadows, drawing on skills she'd hoped were buried forever. The hunter had become the hunted, but she wasn't the same woman who disappeared into witness protection. She was a mother now, with everything to lose and nothing left to hide behind. The deadly game had begun. Sarah's hands trembled as she disconnected the call, the secure phone feeling heavy in her grip. Marcus Chen's words echoed in her mind. Victor Kozlov is very much alive. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her distress, and she pressed a protective hand to her belly. The sound of approaching footsteps on the gravel driveway made her freeze. Through the kitchen window, she saw David's familiar silhouette emerging from his truck, his medical bag slung over one shoulder. For a moment, she considered slipping upstairs, avoiding the conversation that would inevitably come, but the front door was already opening. "Sarah, I saw your car was back." His voice carried that gentle concern she'd grown to love, the same tone he used with frightened patience. How did everything go in town? She forced herself to breathe normally, sliding the phone into the drawer beneath a stack of dish towels. "Fine, just some errands." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, his dark hair tousled from a long day at the clinic. His eyes immediately found hers, searching. After 6 months together, he'd learned to read the subtle signs of her moods, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided direct eye contact when something was wrong. "You look pale," he said, crossing to her. "Are you feeling all right? Any contractions?" "I'm fine." She turned toward the sink, needing something to do with her hands. "Just tired." His reflection appeared beside hers in the window as he moved behind her, close enough that she could smell his familiar scent, soap and coffee and something uniquely him. His hands settled gently on her shoulders. "Sarah, what's wrong?" The question hung between them, loaded with all the trust they'd built and all the secrets she'd never shared. She watched a hawk circle overhead through the glass, remembering another lifetime when she'd been the predator, not the prey. "Nothing's wrong." She leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "The baby's just been active today." David's hands moved to her belly, his medical instincts taking over. "Show me where." She guided his hands to the spot where tiny feet had been drumming against her ribs. As if on cue, the baby delivered a sharp kick, and David chuckled softly. "Strong little one," he murmured against her ear. "Takes after Mom, I'd guess." If only he knew how right he was. Sarah closed her eyes, letting herself sink into this moment of normalcy. Tomorrow she might have to become someone else again. Tonight she could still be just Sarah, pregnant, content, safe. "David," she said quietly, "if something happened, if we had to leave here suddenly, would you trust me?" The question surprised them both. She felt him stiffen slightly behind her. "Leave? What do you mean?" She turned in his arms, studying his face. The late afternoon light streaming through the window highlighted the worry lines around his eyes, the stubble along his jaw. This man had given her sanctuary without asking questions, had loved her without demanding her past in return. Just hypothetically, if I said we needed to go tonight and I couldn't explain why, would you trust me enough to come? David was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "Sarah, I don't know what you did before you came here, and I don't care. I've seen how you watch the road when a strange car passes. I've noticed you always sit facing the door in restaurants. I know you check the locks twice before bed." His thumb traced along her cheekbone. "I've been waiting for whatever you're running from to catch up." The admission hit her like a physical blow. "You knew?" "I suspected. A woman doesn't just appear in a place like this with no history, no connections, unless she's got good reason." His smile was sad but understanding. "I hoped maybe you'd eventually trust me enough to tell me." Sarah felt tears threatening, another pregnancy side effect she hadn't anticipated. "I wanted to protect you." "From what?" Before she could answer, her secure phone buzzed from inside the drawer. The sound was muffled but distinct, and David's eyes sharpened with recognition. Nobody else knew this number except Marcus. "That's not your regular phone," David said quietly. Sarah pulled away from him, retrieving the device. The text message was brief. "To new intel. Kozlov's team crossed the border 6 hours ago. You need to move. Now." She looked up to find David watching her, his expression a mixture of fear and determination. The man she'd fallen in love with stood at the crossroads of her two worlds, and she realized with crystalline clarity that she couldn't protect him by keeping him in the dark any longer. "Pack light," she said, her voice shifting into the tone she hadn't used in months. "All business, no room for argument. We leave in 10 minutes. The abandoned warehouse loomed before them, its broken windows like dead eyes staring into the night. Sarah pressed herself against the rusted exterior wall, feeling the baby shift restlessly inside her. Marcus had gone silent 20 minutes ago, and that silence felt more ominous than any threat he could have voiced. David crouched beside her, his breathing shallow. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage on his shoulder, but he hadn't complained once during their desperate flight through the industrial district. "There," Sarah whispered, pointing to a service entrance partially hidden behind a dumpster. "We can get inside without using the main doors." "This is insane," David muttered. "We should be running, not walking into whatever trap Marcus has set." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her weapon. Running only delays the inevitable. Marcus won't stop. The people who sent him won't stop. This ends tonight, one way or another. The service door yielded to her lockpicks with surprising ease. Too easy. Marcus wanted them inside. Sarah felt the familiar ice-cold clarity that had made her one of the Bureau's most effective agents. Every nerve ending hummed with awareness as they slipped into the darkness. The warehouse stretched before them like a cathedral of shadows. Pale moonlight filtered through the broken skylights, creating pools of silver on the concrete floor. Ancient machinery squatted in the corners like sleeping beasts. A slow clap echoed from somewhere in the darkness above them. "Impressive, Sarah. Even pregnant and supposedly retired, you're still quite resourceful." Marcus's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Though I must say, bringing the good doctor along complicates things unnecessarily." Sarah pushed David behind a concrete pillar and scanned the catwalks above. Multiple hiding spots, countless angles of attack. This was Marcus's kind of battlefield, chaotic, unpredictable. "What do you want, Marcus?" she called out. "The Kozlov case is dead. The evidence is gone. There's nothing left to protect or expose." His laughter was like broken glass. "Oh, but there is. You see, certain parties have grown quite concerned about your retirement. They worry you might develop a conscience in your old age. Start talking to journalists, writing memoirs." A footstep scraped somewhere to their left. Sarah tensed, but it could have been a distraction. Marcus was too good to make careless noise. "So kill me," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "But leave David out of it. He doesn't know anything." "Touching. But you know I can't do that. He's seen too much, been too close. Besides, I have something much more interesting in mind." The lights suddenly blazed to life, flooding the warehouse with harsh fluorescent glare. Sarah's eyes adjusted quickly, training kicking in. She spotted Marcus immediately, 30 feet away on the main floor, no longer bothering to hide. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, lean, with the predatory stillness of a natural killer. But he wasn't alone. 3 men emerged from behind shipping containers, weapons drawn. Military posture, professional spacing. This wasn't just Marcus playing games. This was a sanctioned operation. "The offer on the table is simple," Marcus continued, his tone conversational. "You come with us quietly, resume your old life, your old loyalties. In exchange, the doctor lives, and your child grows up with a mother." Sarah felt the baby kick hard against her ribs, as if responding to the tension in her body. Her mind raced through possibilities, angles of attack, escape routes. But every scenario ended the same way. Too many guns, too many variables, and David's safety to consider. "And if I refuse?" Marcus shrugged. "Then we do this the unpleasant way, starting with Dr. Chen." One of the gunmen shifted his aim toward David's pillar. Sarah saw David's shadow against the concrete, saw how exposed he was. Her finger tightened on her trigger. "You have 10 seconds to decide," Marcus said, checking his watch with theatrical precision. 9, 8. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every choice that had brought her to this moment. The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant hum of the fluorescent lights and her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. 7, 6. She thought of the quiet house by the lake, the life she'd built brick by brick away from all this violence. She thought of David's hands delivering babies, bringing life into the world instead of taking it away. 5, 4. The baby kicked again, harder this time. A reminder of what she stood to lose, but also what she stood to protect. Some lines, once crossed, changed everything. 3, 2. Sarah opened her eyes and stepped out from behind the pillar, her weapon raised. Her voice, when it came, carried the cold authority of the agent she'd once been. "Counteroffer, Marcus. You and your friends walk away now, and I let you live long enough to explain to your bosses why you failed." The warehouse held its breath, balanced on the knife's edge between negotiation and bloodshed. The safe house smelled like dust and old wood. its windows boarded from the inside with heavy plywood. Sarah counted 3 exit routes within 30 seconds of entering: front door, back door, and a window in the rear bedroom that Marcus had left unblocked for emergencies. Old habits. "This place has been off the books for 6 years, Marcus said, setting down a bag of supplies. "Even I forgot about it until yesterday." Sarah lowered herself carefully onto the worn couch, her back aching from the drive. The baby had been restless since they'd left the cabin, as if sensing her elevated heart rate. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the reassuring flutter of movement. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Hard to say. Kozlov's people are thorough, but they're not magicians. This should buy us 48 hours, maybe more." Marcus moved through the house with practiced efficiency, checking locks and sight lines. Sarah watched him work, remembering their partnership from what felt like another lifetime. He'd always been meticulous, the kind of agent who planned for scenarios that seemed impossible until they happened. "Tell me about the stranger," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Everything you remember." Sarah closed her eyes, letting the memory surface. Mid-30s, dark hair, expensive clothes under all the dirt and blood. Russian accent, but his English was too good, probably American-educated. The way he looked at me. She paused. "He knew exactly who I was, Marcus. Not just my name, he knew my history." "What did he say exactly?" "Word for word." "They found you. Kozlov knows about the baby." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. "Then something about how I couldn't run forever." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Kozlov's been in federal custody for 2 years. Maximum security. Since when has a prison cell stopped him from running his organization? You know as well as I do that his reach extends far beyond those walls." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Sarah had put Viktor Kozlov away, but the victory had come at a cost that still woke her in cold sweats. The human trafficking ring they'd dismantled had been just one tentacle of a much larger operation, and cutting it off had only made the remaining beast angrier. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. "The reason I was already in town when you called." Sarah's blood went cold. "What aren't you telling me?" 3 weeks ago we intercepted chatter about a high-value target, codename Phoenix. The timeline matches up with someone trying to locate you." He leaned forward, his expression grim. "Sarah, I think they've been closing in for weeks, maybe longer." The baby kicked hard against her ribs, and Sarah winced. Everything she'd built over the past 3 years, the quiet life, the small-town anonymity, the chance to raise her child in peace, it had all been an illusion. She'd been living on borrowed time. "What's the play?" she asked, falling back into the tactical mindset that had kept her alive through 7 years with the Bureau. "We have options. I can arrange new identities, get you and the baby somewhere they'll never find you. Witness protection, off the books, running again." The words left a sour taste in her mouth. "What's the other option?" Marcus hesitated. "We end this, permanently." Sarah knew what he meant. It was the option she'd been avoiding since she'd walked away from the Bureau, the one that required her to become someone she'd sworn she'd never be again. But as another sharp kick reminded her of what she had to protect, the choice became clearer. "I can't keep looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life," she said. "And I won't raise my child in fear. Think about what you're saying. You're 8 months pregnant, Sarah. This isn't a fair fight." Never was. She stood slowly, moving to the window and peering through a gap in the plywood. The street outside was empty, but shadows seemed to move differently now, carrying threats in every corner. "But I have advantages they don't expect." "Such as?" "They think I've gone soft. 3 years of small-town life, pregnancy, domestic bliss." She turned back to Marcus, and he flinched slightly at the look in her eyes. "They're wrong." Marcus studied her face for a long moment. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure I won't spend the next 18 years teaching my daughter how to run and hide." Sarah's hand moved protectively over her belly. "Kozlov made this personal when he threatened my family. Then we'll need weapons, equipment, and a plan that doesn't get you or the baby killed." Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar weight of purpose settling over her shoulders. The peaceful life she'd built was already gone, shattered by 3 whispered words in a forest clearing. Now the only path forward led through the darkness she'd tried so hard to leave behind. The predator she'd buried was awakening, and this time she had everything to lose. The safe house smelled like stale cigarettes and fear. Sarah pressed her back against the reinforced door, feeling the baby kick restlessly against her ribs as if sensing the tension crackling through the air. Marcus stood by the window, peering through a gap in the blackout curtains, his jaw tight with concentration. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked, her hand instinctively moving to the Glock, holstered beneath her jacket. "Maybe an hour if we're lucky." They're moving methodically through the grid, checking every possible location. Marcus turned from the window, his face grim. "Sarah, there's something else. Something I should have told you before." The way he said her name made ice form in her stomach. "What?" "The woman you testified against, Natasha Kozlov. She didn't just put a price on your head. She made it personal." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her a grainy surveillance photo. This was taken yesterday outside the courthouse in Portland. Sarah's blood turned to liquid nitrogen. The photo showed a tall woman with platinum blonde hair and cold blue eyes. Even in the pixelated image, Kozlov's predatory smile was unmistakable. "She's here, in Oregon. She flew in 3 days ago. Private jet, false documentation. My sources say she's brought a team of specialists, the kind who don't leave witnesses." Another kick from the baby, stronger this time, and Sarah had to steady herself against the wall. 8 months pregnant, carrying the weight of new life while death circled closer with each passing hour. The irony wasn't lost on her. "We need to move," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Every minute we stay here increases the risk." Marcus shook his head. "You're in no condition to run. Not like this." "Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Don't you dare tell me what I can or can't do because I'm pregnant. I survived 2 years undercover in Kozlov's organization. I gathered enough evidence to dismantle her trafficking network and put half her lieutenants behind bars. A little extra weight isn't going to stop me now." But even as she said it, Sarah felt the crushing reality of her situation. The safe house was compromised. The marshals who were supposed to protect her were dead, and somewhere out there, the most dangerous woman she'd ever known was hunting her with professional killers. Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and swore under his breath. "They found the cabin where you were staying, burned it to the ground." Sarah's chest tightened. The little A-frame house where she'd spent the last 6 months, building a new life, preparing for motherhood, believing she could finally be safe. Gone. "What about my neighbors? The Hendersons live just down the ridge. Evacuated. I called in a gas leak to the fire department. They're clearing a 2-mile radius. At least innocent people wouldn't get caught in the crossfire." Sarah had learned long ago that collateral damage was the heaviest burden an agent could carry. She wouldn't add to that weight. The baby shifted again, and this time Sarah felt something different, a tightening across her lower back, a pressure that made her breath catch. She gripped the edge of a nearby table, waiting for the sensation to pass. "Sarah." Marcus was beside her in an instant. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, just another wave of pressure, stronger this time." She looked down at her belly, realization dawning with horrifying clarity. No, this can't be happening now. "Are you in labor?" "It's too early. I still have 4 weeks." But her body disagreed. The contractions were unmistakable, even if they were still minutes apart. Stress could trigger premature labor, and she'd certainly had enough stress to last a lifetime. Marcus ran both hands through his hair. "Okay, we need to get you to a hospital." "Absolutely not. Hospitals keep records, they have security cameras, Sarah, you need medical attention. The baby needs to survive long enough to be born." Sarah straightened, pushing through the discomfort. "Kozlov will have people watching every medical facility within 50 miles. The moment I walk into a hospital, we're dead." Through the window, the distant sound of helicopters grew louder. Marcus peered through the curtains again, his expression darkening. Black SUVs, 2 blocks north. They're doing a door-to-door sweep. Sarah felt another contraction building and breathed through it. She had maybe 20 minutes before the pain became too intense to function effectively. 20 minutes to figure out how to escape a closing net of professional killers while going into premature labor. She thought of the life growing inside her, innocent and unaware of the violence that threatened to claim them both. For 8 months, Sarah had promised this child a peaceful world far from the darkness of her past. Now that past had found them, and the only way forward was through. "Get the emergency kit," she told Marcus, checking her weapon. "We're leaving. Now." The abandoned gas station materialized from the pre-dawn darkness like a skeletal monument to better times. Sarah killed the engine 200 yards out, her hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. 8 months ago, she'd driven past this place dozens of times, never imagining it would become her potential grave. Marcus stirred in the passenger seat, his breathing shallow but steady. The makeshift bandage around his shoulder had held, though dark stains had seeped through the fabric. She'd managed to keep him stable during the 3-hour drive, but he needed real medical attention soon. "Sarah," his voice was barely a whisper, "you don't have to do this." She touched her belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly inside her. "Yes, I do." The gas station sat at the intersection of 2 forgotten highways, its broken windows gaping like dead eyes. Weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete, and the old Texaco sign hung at a defeated angle, perfect for an ambush, perfect for ending things quietly. Sarah checked her weapons one final time. The Glock felt foreign in her hands after months of domesticity, but muscle memory was already reasserting itself. She'd hidden spare magazines in the car's glove compartment years ago, back when paranoia had been her closest companion. Now that paranoia might save her life. "The plan stays the same," she murmured, more to herself than Marcus. "I go in alone. If shooting starts, you drive away, like hell. You're injured and untrained. You'll get us both killed." She softened her tone. "Someone needs to tell this story if I don't make it out." Marcus grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "What about your baby?" The question hung between them like a physical weight. Sarah had been asking herself the same thing for hours. Every logical part of her screamed to run, to find some distant corner of the world where Constantine's reach couldn't follow. But she'd tried running before. It never worked forever. "My baby deserves a mother who isn't looking over her shoulder every day," she said finally. She slipped from the car into the cold morning air. The silence was absolute except for the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. No birds sang. Even the insects seemed to sense the wrongness of this place. The rendezvous point was specific, pump number 3, where Constantine would be waiting with whatever terms he thought she might accept. Sarah knew better. Men like Constantine didn't negotiate. They demonstrated power. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, unpunctual as always. "Come alone or the next bullet finds your friend's other shoulder." Sarah's blood chilled. They were watching. She scanned the tree line beyond the station but saw nothing. Professional surveillance was invisible until it wanted to be seen. She started walking across the cracked asphalt, each step measured and deliberate. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing the danger. Sarah placed a protective hand over her belly and kept moving. Constantine emerged from behind the station like smoke given form, tall, lean, with silver hair that caught the early light. He wore an expensive suit that looked absurdly formal against the desolate backdrop. 2 men flanked him, both carrying automatic weapons with casual familiarity. "Sarah Chen," Constantine called out, his accent thick with old-world menace. "You've been remarkably difficult to locate." Not difficult enough, apparently. She stopped 20 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to react if things went sideways. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. Justice for my brother. Your brother was a sociopathic arms dealer who got 3 federal agents killed. Justice was a bullet between his eyes. Konstantin's smile was winter cold. Perspective is everything, isn't it? To me, you're simply a murderer who needs to pay for her crimes. Sarah felt the familiar calm descending, the operational mindset that had kept her alive through dozens of deadly encounters. Time seemed to slow as she catalogued threats and calculated angles. The gunmen were positioned to crossfire if she moved left or right. A third shooter was probably hidden in the tree line, covering her retreat route. "Here's my counteroffer," she said. "Walk away. Forget you found me. Pretend Victor died in some other war. I'm afraid that's impossible. You see, I've spent considerable resources tracking you down. My associates expect a return on their investment." "What? Associates?" Konstantin's smile widened. "Did you really think this was personal? My dear Sarah, you've made enemies in very high places, people who remember your inconvenient talent for uncovering secrets. Your pregnancy has made you careless." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about Victor. Someone had used Konstantin's grief as a weapon, pointing him toward her like a guided missile. The question was who? "Surprised?" Konstantin continued. "You always were too trusting. It's what made you such an effective agent, and what makes you such a vulnerable target." Sarah's hand drifted toward her concealed weapon. The endgame was starting, and she was already 3 moves behind. The safe house smelled like stale coffee and fear. Sarah sat hunched over Marcus Chen's laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard while her unborn daughter pressed insistently against her ribs. Every few minutes she had to pause and breathe through the discomfort, but she couldn't afford to stop, not when she was this close to finding answers. "Anything?" Detective Morrison asked from across the cramped kitchen table. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually crisp shirt was wrinkled from their sleepless night. Sarah shook her head, scrolling through another database of shell companies and offshore accounts. "Victor Kozlov's network runs deeper than we thought. Every lead turns into 3 more dead ends." She paused, studying a financial transaction that seemed out of place. "Wait, this is interesting." Morrison leaned forward as Sarah highlighted a series of payments flowing between companies with innocuous names like Sunrise Holdings and Pacific Ventures. "These payments started 8 months ago," she said, her voice tight with realization. "Right after I testified against Kozlov's operation." "Blood money," Morrison muttered. "He's been paying to track you down." Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Agent Williams. The FBI task force had raided 2 more locations overnight, but Kozlov's people had vanished like smoke. They were always 1 step behind, and Sarah knew why. Someone was feeding information to the other side. A sharp kick from the baby made Sarah gasp and place her hand on her stomach. The movement was stronger now, more urgent, as if her daughter could sense the danger closing in around them. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the quiet cabin, the hiking trails, the simple life she'd built. All of it felt like a dream now. "We need to change tactics," she said, opening her eyes with newfound determination. "Kozlov wants me to run, to hide, to act like the scared pregnant woman he thinks I am. But that's not who I am." Morrison frowned. "Sarah, you can't seriously be thinking of—" "I'm thinking of ending this." She turned the laptop screen toward him, showing a blueprint she'd pulled from city planning records. "Kozlov owns this warehouse through one of his shell companies. It's isolated, perfect for someone who needs to stay hidden while coordinating a manhunt. That's speculation. No, it's profiling." Sarah's training kicked in, her mind mapping behavioral patterns and tactical advantages. He's methodical, paranoid, and he likes to oversee important operations personally. This warehouse gives him everything he needs: privacy, multiple exit routes, and a clear view of anyone approaching. Morrison studied the blueprint, his detective instincts warring with his protective ones. "Even if you're right, it's too dangerous. You're 8 months pregnant, for God's sake." Sarah stood slowly, her hands supporting her lower back. That's exactly why this has to end now. I won't raise my daughter in hiding, always looking over our shoulders, wondering when they'll find us again. Through the safe house window, Sarah could see the first hints of dawn painting the sky pink and gold. Somewhere out there, Kozlov's network was still hunting, still planning. The man Marcus Chen had been paid to deliver her to was probably growing impatient, angry at the delay. That made him dangerous in a different way. "I need you to contact Williams," Sarah said, pulling on her jacket with careful movements. "Tell him to position teams here and here." She pointed to locations on the map that would create a containment net around the warehouse. "But they stay back until my signal." "And what exactly is your signal going to be?" Sarah smiled grimly. "You'll know it when you see it." Morrison grabbed her arm as she headed for the door. "This is insane, Sarah. You're not thinking clearly." She looked down at his hand, then back up at his worried face. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. For 8 months I've been running from who I used to be, telling myself I could just disappear into a normal life. But normal was never an option, not for me." Her phone rang, Williams calling with an update. Sarah answered, listening as he reported another failed raid. When she hung up, Morrison was still staring at her with a mixture of admiration and terror. "Viktor Kozlov thinks he knows me," Sarah said quietly. "He thinks pregnancy makes me weak, vulnerable. He's about to learn how wrong he is." She walked to the window and looked out at the awakening city. Somewhere in those shadows, a dangerous man was waiting for her. But Sarah Chen, former FBI agent, soon-to-be mother, and the woman who had put away more criminals than she could count, was done waiting. The baby kicked again, and this time Sarah smiled. "Hang on, little one," she whispered. "Mommy has some unfinished business to take care of." The cabin's silence pressed against Sarah's ears as she moved through the darkness, her swollen belly making each step deliberate and careful. 8 months of pregnancy had changed her center of gravity, but muscle memory guided her through the familiar layout. She'd memorized every creaking floorboard, every shadow cast by moonlight through the windows. Marcus lay unconscious on the couch where she'd left him, his breathing steady but labored. The makeshift bandage around his shoulder was holding, though a dark stain had begun to seep through the fabric. Sarah fought the urge to check on him again. Time was running out, and sentiment would get them both killed. She retrieved the go-bag from behind the false panel in the bedroom closet, her fingers finding the hidden release mechanism in the dark. Inside, cash, 3 sets of identification documents, a satellite phone, and the Glock 19 she'd hoped never to touch again. The weapon felt foreign in her hands after months of carrying only baby books and prenatal vitamins. A vehicle's engine rumbled in the distance, growing closer. Sarah's blood chilled as she recognized the distinctive growl of multiple motorcycles approaching. The consortium had found them faster than she'd anticipated. They weren't just sending one cleaner this time, they were bringing an army. She moved to the kitchen window and peered through the gap in the curtains. 4 sets of headlights wound up the mountain road, their beams cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like searchlights. They'd be here in minutes. "Marcus." She shook his good shoulder gently but firmly. "We need to move, now." His eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding his features before reality snapped back into focus. "How long was I out?" 20 minutes. "Can you walk?" He struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounded shoulder. "I can manage, but Sarah, you need to listen to me. There's something about the consortium you don't know. Whatever it is can wait. They're almost here." "No, it can't." His hand gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "The man you killed 8 months ago, Viktor Kozlov, he wasn't just a consortium operative. He was the son of their leader." Sarah's stomach dropped. She'd known Kozlov was important, but she'd assumed his death would be written off as an occupational hazard. Crime bosses lost soldiers all the time. But a son? That changed everything. "This was never about tying up loose ends," Marcus continued, his voice urgent. "This is about revenge. Elena Kozlov won't stop until she watches you die." The sound of engines cut off abruptly. They were here. Sarah's mind raced through their options. The back door led to a steep slope that dropped toward the creek, manageable for her in normal circumstances, but treacherous while pregnant. The front was obviously compromised. The cellar had an old tunnel that connected to the root cellar 50 yards away, but she hadn't checked if it was still passable. A door slammed outside, followed by the crunch of boots on gravel. Multiple voices, speaking in what sounded like Russian. "The tunnel," she whispered to Marcus. "Can you crawl? Lead the way." They made it to the cellar just as the first floor above them erupted in noise. Boots stomped across the wooden floor, furniture crashed, and men shouted orders in multiple languages. Sarah heard the distinctive sound of doors being kicked in, drawers being yanked out and overturned. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a stack of canning jars that Sarah had left undisturbed as camouflage. She began moving them carefully, each glass container a potential alarm bell if dropped. Marcus helped with his good arm, though she could see the effort was costing him. Above them, someone had found the bedroom. She heard her mattress being flipped, the closet being torn apart. It wouldn't be long before they discovered the secret panel and realized she'd been prepared for this moment. The tunnel opening revealed itself as a black mouth in the foundation wall. Sarah shone her phone's flashlight into the passage. It was clear for as far as she could see, though thick with cobwebs and the musty smell of decades of disuse. "You first," Marcus whispered. "I'll move slower. You go, Sarah." His voice carried a finality that made her blood run cold. "Look at me." She turned to find him holding his left hand against his side. In the phone's glow, she could see fresh blood seeping between his fingers. "The bullet didn't just hit my shoulder," he said quietly. "I think it nicked something internal. I'm not going to make it to wherever we're going. Don't you dare." Footsteps thundered down the cellar stairs. Marcus pushed her toward the tunnel opening. "Go, save your baby. I'll buy you time." "Marcus, no." The cellar door burst open, and automatic weapons fire erupted behind them as Sarah disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel, her heart breaking with every step that carried her away from the man who had just sacrificed himself for her unborn child. The safe house sat abandoned in the pre-dawn darkness, its windows like dead eyes staring across the valley. Sarah crouched behind a cluster of pine trees 50 yards away, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, but she forced herself to remain perfectly still. Marcus had been inside for 23 minutes. She pressed her hand against her swollen belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. Even now, her child seemed to sense the danger surrounding them. The kicks were more frequent, more urgent, as if warning her to run. But running wasn't an option anymore. Tonight, this ended. A shadow moved past one of the upper windows. Sarah's grip tightened on the Glock she'd taken from the dead operative at her cabin. 3 rounds left. She'd counted them obsessively during the drive here, knowing that precision would matter more than firepower. The front door opened with a soft creak that carried clearly in the mountain silence. Marcus stepped onto the porch, his phone pressed to his ear. Even from this distance, Sarah could hear the tension in his voice. "No, she's not here. The place is clean." A pause. "I understand the timeline, but maybe we missed something. Maybe she never came back." Sarah smiled grimly. She'd been counting on that assumption. The safe house had been her backup plan 3 years ago, a property purchased under a carefully constructed false identity, but she'd never used it, never even spent a night there. It existed only on paper, in financial records that Marcus would have eventually uncovered if he'd dug deep enough, which he had. "Check the coordinates again," Marcus said into the phone. "She has to be somewhere in this area." Sarah began moving through the trees, using the skills that had kept her alive in Beirut and Mogadishu. Each step was calculated, silent, her body remembering the rhythm despite the extra weight she carried. The baby shifted again, a sharp jab against her ribs that made her pause and breathe through the discomfort. She was 15 yards away when Marcus ended the call. He stood on the porch for a moment, scanning the tree line. In the moonlight, his face looked haggard, older than she remembered. This hunt had cost him something too. "I know you're out there, Sarah," his voice carried across the clearing. "This doesn't have to end badly. We can make a deal." Sarah continued her approach, using the shadows cast by the porch overhang. 12 yards, 10. The wooden steps would creak under her weight, but she wouldn't need to use them. "Victor's dead," Marcus called out. "Shot in his hotel room in Denver. Very professional work. The kind they taught us at Quantico." 8 yards. Sarah could see the backup weapon clipped to Marcus's belt, the slight bulge of body armor under his jacket. He was prepared for a firefight, but not for what she had planned. "The thing is," Marcus continued, turning slowly as he spoke, "Victor kept records. Insurance policies, names, dates, financial transactions, everything." 6 yards. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and she nearly gasped. She pressed her free hand against her side, willing the child to be still. "Those records are sitting in a safety deposit box in Zurich. If anything happens to me, they'll be released to every major news outlet in the country. Your name is all over them, Sarah, your real name." 4 yards. Close enough to see the sweat beading on Marcus's forehead despite the cold. Close enough to hear the slight tremor in his voice that betrayed his fear. "But we can end this cleanly. You disappear again. New identity, new life. All I need is the location of the Kolchak files." Sarah stepped out of the shadows, her weapon trained on Marcus's center mass. "Hello, Marcus." He spun toward her, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun, but stopping when he saw her finger on the trigger. "Smart choice," Sarah said. "Now put your hands where I can see them." Marcus raised his hands slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "You look tired, Sarah. This can't be easy in your condition. The Kolchak files burned in a warehouse fire in Baltimore 2 years ago. I made sure of that before I disappeared. I don't believe you." "I don't care what you believe." Sarah took another step forward, close enough now that she couldn't miss. "What I care about is making sure my child never has to look over their shoulder because of choices I made." Marcus's eyes flicked to her belly, then back to her face. "Killing me won't solve your problem. There are others." "Maybe. But you're the one who found me. You're the one who won't let this go." The baby kicked again, and Sarah felt a sudden sharp pain low in her back. "You're the one who brought war to my home." She saw the moment Marcus decided to make his move, the slight shift in his stance that preceded action. But Sarah had been watching for it, waiting for it. The Glock barked once in the mountain silence. The warehouse sat like a rotting tooth against the industrial skyline, its broken windows catching fragments of the dying light. Sarah crouched behind a shipping container, her breathing measured despite the weight pressing against her ribs. The baby had been restless all afternoon, as if sensing the tension coiling through her body. Marcus checked his weapon one final time. 3 guards on the perimeter that we can see. Could be more inside. "There are." Sarah's voice was flat with certainty. "Victor doesn't leave anything to chance. He'll have at least 6 men, probably 8. Motion sensors on the main entrances, backup generator in case we cut the power. You sound like you know this place." "I've been here before. Different life." She touched her belly absently, remembering the last time she'd stood outside this warehouse. 3 years ago, hunting a human trafficking ring. Victor had slipped through her fingers then, disappearing into the network of corruption that had eventually forced her to fake her own death. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd chosen to hide less than 50 miles from one of his operations. Agent Chen's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures on the 2nd floor. East wing. Could be your husband, David." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, pushing down the surge of fear and guilt. She'd brought this on him, her past, her choices, her enemies. The man who'd given her a new name, a new life, a future worth living for, and she'd painted a target on his back. "Sarah," Marcus's hand found her shoulder. "We can wait for backup. SWAT is 20 minutes out." David doesn't have 20 minutes. She was already moving, staying low as she approached the fence line. Victor isn't patient when he's been crossed. And I've been running from him for 3 years. The first guard went down silently, Sarah's arms snaking around his throat from behind. Muscle memory kicked in as she lowered his unconscious form to the ground, her body moving with the deadly efficiency she'd spent months trying to forget. The pregnancy made her slower, forced her to adapt her angles and leverage, but the skills were still there. They'd always be there. Marcus followed her lead, taking out the second perimeter guard with practiced precision. They moved like ghosts through the shadows, communicating with hand signals that came back to Sarah as naturally as breathing. The side entrance was exactly where she remembered it. The lock took her 40 seconds to pick. Rusty fingers, she thought grimly. Once she could have done it in 15. Inside, the warehouse stretched into darkness, broken only by shafts of light from the floor above. The smell hit her immediately. Fear, sweat, and something else. Blood, but not fresh. Old violence soaked into the concrete. They took the stairs slowly, Sarah's hand trailing along the wall for balance. The baby chose that moment to kick hard against her ribs, and she bit back a gasp. Not now. Just hold on a little longer. Movement ahead, Marcus whispered. 2 guards flanked a heavy door at the end of the corridor. Through the grimy window, Sarah could see another room beyond. Her heart clenched as she caught sight of a familiar silhouette slumped in a chair. David. Even from this distance, she could see the blood on his shirt, the unnatural angle of his left arm. But he was sitting upright. He was alive. I go high, you go low, she murmured to Marcus. Sarah, your condition isn't a condition. It's a pregnancy, and I've been doing this job since before you graduated college. Her voice carried an edge that made him step back. Follow my lead. The first guard never saw her coming. Sarah's elbow caught him in the throat while Marcus took down the second. They dragged the bodies away from the door, and Sarah peered through the window again. Victor Kozlov stood with his back to her, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the warehouse setting. He was talking to David, his voice too low to make out words, but she could read the tension in his shoulders, the casual way he gestured with the pistol in his right hand. Wondering when she'd show up, Victor was saying as Sarah pressed her ear to the door. Though I admit, I expected someone a bit more mobile. 8 months, isn't it? Congratulations. David's head lifted slightly, and even through the blood and bruising, Sarah could see his eyes widen as he spotted her in the window. She pressed a finger to her lips, praying he wouldn't give her away. She won't come, David said, his voice hoarse but steady. Sarah's smarter than that. Victor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, Dr. Chen, you really don't know your wife at all, do you? He turned toward the window, and Sarah found herself staring into the pale blue eyes that had haunted her nightmares for 3 years. Victor smiled, raised his free hand and waved. Hello, Agent Morrison. Shall we finish what we started? The abandoned warehouse stretched before them like a concrete tomb, its broken windows catching the last fragments of daylight. Sarah pressed her back against the cold brick wall, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Marcus crouched beside her, his weathered face etched with concern as he checked his weapon one final time. You sure about this? He whispered, his eyes darting toward the rusted entrance where shadows moved behind grimy glass. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her swollen belly, feeling the baby's restless stirring. 8 months of peace, of believing she'd escaped the darkness that had consumed her former life. Now it all came down to this moment, this place where Vincent Kozlov waited with answers she both craved and feared. I have to know, she murmured, adjusting the tactical vest that barely fit around her pregnant frame. If I don't end this now, my child will never be safe. The weight of the Glock felt foreign yet familiar in her grip. Muscle memory kicked in despite the months away from fieldwork, her body automatically checking sight lines and calculating angles of approach. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing the tension radiating through her system. Marcus touched her shoulder gently. We go in quiet, extract information, get out clean. Sarah nodded, though they both knew nothing about this situation would be clean. Vincent Kozlov didn't survive 20 years in international arms dealing by playing fair. The text message that had drawn them here was either a genuine offer of information or an elaborate trap. Given her luck lately, she suspected the latter. They moved toward the entrance with practiced stealth, their footsteps silent on the cracked asphalt. Sarah's pregnancy slowed her movements, but her instincts remained sharp. Every shadow could conceal a threat, every sound might signal an ambush. The warehouse door stood slightly ajar, darkness pooling beyond like spilled ink. Marcus held up 3 fingers, counting down silently. On 0, they moved. The interior reeked of rust and decay. Moonlight filtered through broken skylights, creating a patchwork of illumination across the vast empty space. Their footsteps echoed despite their efforts at silence. Agent Chen. The voice emerged from the shadows near the far wall. Or should I say, Sarah Henderson. I admit, the pregnant housewife disguise is convincing. Vincent Kozlov stepped into view, his silver hair gleaming in the dim light. He appeared alone, but Sarah's trained eye caught the subtle tells of concealed backup. The way shadows fell wrong in certain corners, the faint glint of metal near the loading dock. You wanted to talk, Sarah said, keeping her weapon trained on him. So talk. Vincent smiled, the expression cold and calculating. Direct as always. Very well. The organization that's been hunting you isn't what you think it is. Enlighten me. The Red Hand Initiative wasn't dismantled 3 years ago when you thought you'd destroyed it. It evolved, went deeper underground. And your old partner, Agent Derek Walsh, didn't die in that explosion in Prague. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Derek had been her closest ally, her mentor, and watching him die had broken something inside her that never fully healed. She'd built her new life on the foundation of that grief. You're lying. Am I? Vincent pulled out a tablet, the screen glowing as he turned it toward her. Security footage showed a figure she recognized despite the years and scars. Derek, alive, moving through what looked like a command center. Sarah's vision blurred for a moment, the baby pressed against her ribs, making breathing difficult. That's impossible. I saw the building collapse. His body... A clever ruse. Derek discovered the initiative had moles throughout the bureau. He faked his death to investigate from the shadows. But something changed him during those years underground. The man who emerges isn't the partner you remember. Marcus kept his weapon trained on the shadows while Sarah processed this revelation. Everything she'd believed about the past 3 years crumbled around her. Why tell me this? She demanded. Because Derek is coming for you. Tonight. He believes you're the leak that compromised the Prague operation. In his mind, you're responsible for everything that went wrong. As if summoned by Vincent's words, new sounds echoed through the warehouse. Vehicles approaching, multiple engines cutting off simultaneously, car doors slamming with military precision. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Through the broken windows, she glimpsed tactical lights sweeping the perimeter. Professional movements that spoke of federal training. You set me up, she breathed. Vincent shook his head. I'm trying to save your life. There's an exit through the maintenance tunnel beneath the east wall. But you have perhaps 2 minutes before they breach. The baby kicked frantically now, responding to Sarah's spiking adrenaline. She had to choose, trust the arms dealer who'd manipulated her situation from the beginning, or face whatever Derek had become in the years since his supposed death. Outside, tactical teams moved like ghosts through the darkness, closing in with lethal efficiency. The abandoned warehouse stood like a tomb against the grey dawn sky, its broken windows staring down at Sarah as she approached. Her hand rested protectively over her belly, feeling the baby's restless movements that seemed to mirror her own anxiety. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but Marcus was inside, and this nightmare would never end unless she faced it. She'd circled the building twice, noting the 3 black SUVs parked at strategic points, professional, organized, the same careful planning that had characterized Viktor Kozlov's operations for years. Her former team's encrypted files had revealed the full scope of his network: arms dealing, human trafficking, political assassinations. She'd disrupted a $50 million weapons shipment to a terrorist cell, and men like Kozlov never forgot debts that large. The service entrance on the east side showed signs of recent use. Sarah checked her weapon one final time, the familiar weight both comforting and terrifying. She'd sworn never to hold a gun again, yet here she was, about to walk into a trap with nothing but her wits and decades of training to protect not just herself, but her unborn child. The door opened silently on well-oiled hinges. Inside, the warehouse stretched into shadows, divided by towering shelves and industrial equipment. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through dirty skylights. Sarah moved like a ghost between the machinery, every sense hyper-alert for the slightest sound or movement. She found Marcus tied to a chair near the center of the space, his face bloodied but his eyes alert. He looked up as she approached, and she saw both relief and fear flash across his features. Behind him, from the shadows, stepped a man she recognized from the surveillance photos. Tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that looked incongruous in the grimy warehouse. "Agent Chen," Victor Kozlov said, his accent thick but his English precise. "Or, should I say, Sarah Mitchell. I must admit, your disappearing act was quite impressive. Nearly 8 months of peaceful domesticity. How thoroughly suburban of you." Sarah kept her weapon trained on him while scanning for his backup. "Let him go. Your business is with me." Kozlov laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "My business? You cost me more than money, Agent Chen. You destroyed partnerships that took years to build, made me look weak to very dangerous people." He nodded toward Marcus. "But this one led us right to you. Amazing what people will do when properly motivated." "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, blood trickling from his split lip. "They knew about the cabin, about us. I tried to—" "Enough," Kozlov cut him off. "The question now is what we do with our little reunion. You see, killing you quickly would be unsatisfying. But that child you carry presents interesting possibilities." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Her finger tightened on the trigger. "You lay one hand on my baby, and you'll what? Shoot me? My men have orders to kill your husband the moment they hear gunfire. Quite the predicament for someone who supposedly values domestic tranquility over violence." She could hear them now. At least 3 men positioned around the warehouse. Professional spacing, overlapping fields of fire. They'd chosen their ground well. But Kozlov had made one crucial mistake. He assumed pregnancy had made her soft, that 8 months of peace had dulled her edge. "You want to know what I learned in 8 months of suburban life?" Sarah asked, taking a small step closer. "I learned that some things are worth any sacrifice, that love makes you stronger, not weaker." In one fluid motion, she dove left behind a concrete pillar as gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Marcus's chair toppled as he threw himself sideways, still bound but moving. Sarah rolled behind a metal workbench, her mind automatically cataloguing muzzle flashes and calculating angles. The baby kicked hard, as if responding to her elevated heart rate. She whispered a silent promise. They would both survive this, whatever it took. She heard Kozlov shouting orders, his voice echoing off the warehouse walls. 3 shooters, just as she'd estimated. 1 on the catwalk above, 2 at ground level. They were good, but they were also impatient, advancing too quickly to flush her out. Sarah closed her eyes and let her training take over. She wasn't just a suburban mother hiding from her past anymore. She was Agent Sarah Chen, and she had work to finish. The first gunman rounded the corner of her position in a tactical crouch. She put 2 rounds center mass before he could react. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, but she was already moving, using the shelving units for cover as she worked her way toward Marcus. 1 down, 3 to go, including Kozlov himself. The endgame had finally arrived, and Sarah Mitchell was done running. The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and decay, its broken windows casting fractured shadows across the concrete floor. Sarah pressed herself against a support beam, one hand cradling her swollen belly, the other gripping the pistol she'd taken from Marcus's unconscious form. Her breathing came in controlled bursts as she listened for movement in the maze of machinery and storage containers. 8 months pregnant and playing cat and mouse with professional killers, this wasn't how she'd imagined her maternity leave. A scrape of metal against concrete echoed from somewhere to her left. Sarah counted 3 distinct footsteps before silence returned. They were spreading out, trying to box her in. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd spent years hunting people in places just like this, and now she was the prey. "Sarah!" Viktor Kozlov's voice boomed through the empty space, thick with his Russian accent. "Enough games. You have something that belongs to me, and I have something you want." She closed her eyes, knowing exactly what he meant. The encrypted drive containing evidence of his human trafficking operation, the same evidence that had forced her into witness protection, was hidden in her cabin. And what he had was Detective Linda Martinez, who'd been foolish enough to try helping Sarah disappear again. "Let Martinez go," Sarah called out, shifting position as soon as the words left her mouth. "She doesn't know anything." Kozlov's laugh was cold and sharp. "Perhaps. But she makes excellent motivation, yes? You come out, we make trade, drive for detective. Simple." Nothing was ever simple with men like Kozlov. Sarah had learned that lesson the hard way during her FBI years, watching too many good people die because they believed in honor among thieves. She touched her belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly inside her, as if sensing the danger. Movement caught her peripheral vision, a shadow detaching itself from behind a rusted conveyor belt, creeping toward her position. Sarah waited until the figure was close enough, then stepped out with her weapon raised. "Drop it, Elena." The assassin froze, her own gun halfway to firing position. Elena Vasquez, Kozlov's cleaner, the woman who'd been hunting Sarah for 8 months. Up close, she looked tired, older than her 40 years. "You always were too good at this," Elena said, not lowering her weapon. "Kozlov promised me retirement after this job. Maybe we both walk away tonight. You know that's not how this ends." Sarah kept her aim steady despite the ache spreading through her lower back. "Where's Martinez?" "Office upstairs, still breathing, for now." Elena's eyes flicked to Sarah's belly. "This is stupid, you know, fighting like this in your condition. What if something happens to the baby?" The question hit harder than any physical blow. Sarah had been asking herself the same thing since this nightmare began. But running hadn't worked. Hiding hadn't worked. The only way to protect her child was to eliminate the threat permanently. "Then I guess you better surrender," Sarah said. Elena smiled sadly. "You know I can't do that." The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Elena stumbled backward, clutching her shoulder as her weapon clattered across the floor. Sarah was already moving, keeping her gun trained on the wounded woman while scanning for other threats. "Sarah!" Kozlov's voice was closer now, angry. "I heard shooting. If my Elena is hurt, your detective friend pays the price." A scream echoed from somewhere above, Martinez's voice, sharp with pain. Sarah's jaw clenched as she zip-tied Elena's hands behind her back with restraints pulled from her jacket pocket. Old habits died hard. "Stay down," she whispered to Elena, then began working her way toward the metal staircase leading to the office level. Each step sent a jolt through her body. The baby was restless now, pressing against her ribs as if urging her to find safety. Sarah paused at the landing, listening. Kozlov was talking to someone in rapid Russian, his voice coming from the corner office with the intact windows. She thought about the life she'd built in the mountains, the quiet mornings with coffee and sunrise, the nursery she'd been painting yellow because she wanted to be surprised, the future she'd imagined for herself and her child, peaceful, ordinary, safe, all of it built on borrowed time. Sarah reached the office door and saw Kozlov through the glass, his gun pressed against Martinez's temple. The detective's lip was split, her hands zip-tied behind the chair she was bound to. Her eyes met Sarah's and widened slightly in warning. Too late. Sarah felt the cold barrel of a gun press against the base of her skull. "Drop the weapon," a voice commanded in accented English. Another of Kozlov's men, positioned perfectly to catch her in the blind spot. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger for just a moment, muscle memory from a dozen similar situations. But this time was different. This time she wasn't just risking her own life. The gun clattered to the floor as Sarah raised her hands, feeling her baby kick as if in protest against surrender.